Hi, and welcome to Revising the Short Story. At this point, you've written a short story and you're wondering, how can I make it the best that it can be? You might be pretty happy with where it is right now. We're going to make it better today. You might be rather discouraged about where it is right now. We're going to make it better today. Let's get to work. Almost every short story can be better. Your story probably isn't quite yet that Hemingway-esque jewel of a beautiful story, and you should spend a little time on it. So we are going to spend today in real time actually going through some super important concepts: narration, character, plot, style, and the last one, which is quite difficult, ruthless cutting. The result is going to be amazingness. So what I want you to do is open up your story right now. Because we're going to do this in real time, you should pause the video whenever you need to stop to do a particular activity. First things first, narration. Who tells your story? Does this woman pictured here tell your story? Who do you have telling your story? And why is that so important? Now, you might have made a decision already about narration, but I'm going to ask you to challenge yourself to at least write a few lines in a different narration to see how it sounds, and to think about the possibility of switching your narration depending on why you made the choices that you did. First person is super interesting. Listen to this example. I knew about the wild plums twice before I tasted any. This is the gorgeous opening line from Gray Stonecoat's Wild Plums. And what it does is it captures the feelings of the protagonist in a reflective way that shows us that she is considering what has happened to her and giving us her perspective. First person can be really fun to use. It has this great immediacy. It brings us the voice of the character in a vibrant way. It also is a look inward so that we can see the motivations of our protagonist. You can connect to the reader through first person because you feel you hear this voice coming at you. And of course, the tone reflects the narrator, who is often the protagonist, and we get that important perspective. We can't always trust the first person narrator, but that's a fun thing that you can do with first person if you choose to do so. Let's look at second person for a minute. This is a super unusual point of view, but it can be very useful, particularly in short stories. Lori Moore in You're Ugly Too writes, "You had to get out of there occasionally, those Illinois towns with funny names, Paris, Oblong, Normal." Why use it? Well, the thing about second person is you're using the word you, and you bring the reader right into the text. Sometimes it almost is an instruction manual. First you do this, then you do this, then you do that. It's unusual, but the casual tone can be very useful. Again, not a thing we normally use, but a kind of point of view that can serve you very well if you want to reach right out of the page and grab that reader. The most common form of narration in fiction is third person. Here is Cheever in The Country Husband. To begin at the beginning, the airplane from Minneapolis, in which Francis Weed was traveling east, ran into heavy weather. So the deal about third person is that it gives us so much narrative control. In a wider omniscience, we can see into every character's thoughts, which can be quite useful. It gives you this narrative control, and you can develop a narrator that has a very interesting distance. This is what I want you to do right now. I want you to stop the video, and I want you to rewrite the first paragraph of your story in a different person. If you used first, try second or third, and so on. Give it a shot, do it right now, and get back to me when you're done. Let's move on to talking about character. Every character in your story, every character should want something. Even as Kurt Vonnegut says, a glass of water. We are going to be quoting Vonnegut quite a bit in this particular video because he has so many great insights to offer us. I want you to, right now, in your Google Doc, let us know what every single one of your characters wants. If you only have one character, this shouldn't be too challenging. Moving on in our discussion of character, Vonnegut points out that we need someone to root for. So if you've gotten us into that person's brain through first person, or you have shown us their thoughts in a really great use of third person, but we don't care about that person, then we've got a problem. Is there a character we care about that we're rooting for? In your story right now, I want you to stop and write a sentence that tells us who we're rooting for and why. Here's a last note about character, and this might be a challenging one. Some of you have already done this, I'm sure. Vonnegut's advice is to be a sadist and make something bad happen to your character. We want to see what your character does. We're rooting for this character. What does your character do when something bad happens? If something bad doesn't happen, we don't find out the quality of the character. It is really in times of trouble that we find out what people are made of, and that is also true in short stories. Now let's move on to talk about plot. Kurt Vonnegut says that you should start as close to the end as possible. Do you have a lot of extra stuff in your story? Do you begin with a long introduction that doesn't take us where we need to go? Start as close to that end as you possibly can. Think back through your story, trace it, and make sure you are doing just that. Also, in a short story, you shouldn't have that many scenes. One might be enough. In flash fiction, you really shouldn't have more than 2 unless it's a fable. You don't have to wrap it up. We don't need a lengthy denouement on this particular story. Okay, here's the deal. You should not have many scenes in a short story, so I want you to write them down right now. I want you to put down what are your scenes. If it's one scene, put down number 1, ice cream parlor. Girl decides to try pistachio, finds out she's allergic to nuts. Chaos ensues. You don't need to write more than that. You can see that it's all taking place in one scene. If you are into 3 or 4 scenes in your short story, think close and hard about whether you need every single one. All right, let's move on to style. I want you to now run your story through the website analyzemywriting.com. This is a fantastic website. Take your text and paste it right into the text box. Then you are going to look for 3 different things that fall in categories underneath. You are going to look for basic text statistics, common words and phrases, and passive voice. What do you learn? You should also be looking at your sentence length. You should have some very short sentences, especially at the height of the action. Let's look at an example of how to use Analyze My Writing. I have taken the text of Toni Morrison's short story Sweetness and I have pasted it into the box here below. If I click on Basic Text Statistics and hit Analyze Text, I can get a lot of great information about the story. As you scroll through it, you will see punctuation information. It's kind of fascinating. She uses a lot of dashes, how many commas she uses, etc. This is where it gets interesting. Her sentence length is really where I find the greatest interest. You can see that she has quite a few sentences that are shorter. And that's really interesting. If you scroll over it, you can see how many have 5 words, 4 words, 3 words. She has one sentence on this end that has 50 words, but she doesn't go over that. Her narrator speaks in a very crisp, clear way with shorter words and shorter sentences. That's a choice she made about the way she wanted her narrator to sound. Now, if I go back up to the top and I click on Common Words and Phrases and Analyze Text, I suddenly get new information. The word I occurs 113 times. Makes sense. First person. You can see that the words that occur the most are pretty basic and not a huge surprise as you scroll through it. I do love looking at word count in a cloud, because I think it gives us this great visual. You can get a good idea what her story is about just by looking at this word cloud. See if you can do the same with your own. Then you can also see the number of occurrences of words. Words that are pairs. Lula Ann makes sense. It's a name, right? That occurs quite often. But also other words that appear often in pairs. You might want to switch some of these up if you're doing it too often. Pay attention to it. She doesn't really have too many that are too similar, and some of them are going to reflect the voice of her narrator, which is also really good to see. Then we have the triples. Even more interesting in a way, what are the phrases you're using more and more often? Take a look at those and see if you're using something too often and what you might be able to do about that. The last thing that I want you to check with your particular story is passive voice. And so if you hit Analyze Text, it's going to tell you how many times you might potentially have passive voice sentences. Now, this is of course an interesting exercise because you might want passive voice sentences because it's the way you want your narrator to sound. But you should be aware of the fact that you're doing it. And you will find this to also be very, very useful. The next thing that I would like you to do is to check for adverbs. Run your text through the adverb detector and find out how many you have. Ask yourself, do you need every one? This site is kind of fun because it's for science fiction writers, so it's called C3PO. But I do want you to go there and do the same exercise, pasting in your text. Here I have pasted Toni Morrison's story into the adverb detector. You can see here, and I'm going to hit submit and see what happens. Adverb detector has very helpfully pointed out every single adverb that Morrison used. Interestingly enough, there aren't too many. There are some here, obviously. I want you to question every one. I want you to go through and I want you to earn your adverbs. What I would like you to do is take this particular analysis and I want you to copy the entire thing, and then I want you to paste it into your document so that I can see what all your adverbs are. So just like this, I'm going to copy it and paste it. Do that for me so that I can see, and then go through and interrogate each adverb. Here's the last bit about style. You need to have some figurative language in your story. You should have at least one metaphor or one simile. You should consider having a symbol. Think about personification, alliteration, and the musicality of your language. Remember how some words have a different kind of effect on us depending on if they end with a hard consonant or a softer consonant. Play with words a little bit. If a particular sentence does not sound the way you want it to, spend some time looking for words that are similar that might give you a different sound. I want you now to stop the video and I want you to read your piece out loud. I would like you within your draft that you're currently working on to mark each metaphor, to mark any symbols that you use, to mark personification, alliteration, any other kind of form of figurative language that you see within your own piece. And if you don't see much, guess what? You really need to work on that. So make sure that you add some and see if you can put a richness and a depth to your story that maybe it just doesn't have right now. Okay, now for what might be the hardest part. Ruthless cutting. Read your first sentence. Do you need your first sentence? It might be beautiful. You might have rewritten it 3 or 4 times already. That's okay. I just want you to question it. Do you need your last paragraph? Surprisingly, the number one edit that I often make in student work is to cut the last paragraph entirely. You might not cut your last line. You might not love your last line, but that last paragraph might not be essential. Vonnegut says every sentence must do one of two things. It either has to reveal the character or advance the action. This is what you have to do now. You have to go through every sentence and afterward put either a C for advancing character or revealing character, or an A for advancing action. Every single sentence. Hey, it's a short story, right? You can do this. When you're done with this process, you have learned so much about your short story and you are on your way to making it that much better. The revision process now can be powerful because you have information and you can move forward with that information to create another new spectacular draft. After you finish this process, you might want to put your work aside for a day or at least a couple hours and then come back to it with fresh eyes and see if you can write a newly revised short story that has more depth, more music, more meaning. I know that you're on your way to becoming an even better writer of short stories. Good work.